The old cabin in the woods was the last place anyone would want to find themselves after sunset, but Sarah had no choice. Her car had broken down miles back, and her phone had died, leaving her with no option but to seek shelter for the night. As the sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the forest into darkness, Sarah approached the creaky wooden door of the cabin. It groaned in protest as she pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit interior. Cobwebs hung from the corners, and dust covered the old furniture. She found a half-broken lantern and managed to light it, casting long, flickering shadows on the walls. Trying to shake off the eerie feeling, she settled into an old armchair, pulling a blanket over her shoulders. The silence was deafening, only broken by the occasional rustle of leaves outside. Sarah's eyes grew heavy, and she began to doze off when a sudden noise jolted her awake. A faint whisper seemed to drift through the air, barely audible but unmistakable. She strained to listen, but it was gone. Brushing it off as the wind, she closed her eyes again. But then she heard it once more, clearer this time, a soft, mournful wail. Panic surged through her veins as she stood up, gripping the lantern tightly. She scanned the room, her breath quickening. The sound seemed to be coming from the basement. Her instincts screamed at her to stay away, but curiosity overrode her fear. She crept towards the basement door, each step echoing loudly in the silence. The door creaked open, revealing a steep staircase descending into darkness. She hesitated, but then the whisper came again, louder and more desperate. Gathering her courage, she started down the stairs, the lantern casting eerie shadows on the stone walls. At the bottom, she found herself in a small, damp room. The whispering was now a chorus of voices, filling the air with sorrow and despair. In the center of the room stood an old, wooden chest, its lid slightly ajar. With trembling hands, Sarah lifted the lid. Inside lay a collection of old photographs and letters, all belonging to a family that once lived in the cabin. The letters told a tragic story of loss and grief, and as she read them, the whispers grew louder, almost pleading. Realization dawned on Sarah. These were the restless spirits of the family, trapped and seeking closure. With a heavy heart, she knew what she had to do. She gathered the photographs and letters, took them outside, and buried them under the old oak tree. As she finished, the whispers faded, replaced by a peaceful silence. Sarah felt a sense of calm wash over her, knowing she had helped the spirits find peace. She returned to the cabin, no longer feeling afraid. For the rest of the night, she slept soundly, alone but no longer lonely. As the first light of dawn filtered through the trees, Sarah woke with a sense of tranquility she hadn't felt in years. The events of the night before seemed almost like a dream, but the disturbed ground beneath the oak tree confirmed it had been all too real. She decided to leave the cabin as soon as possible. The forest seemed less menacing in the daylight, and the path back to the main road was easier to navigate. With the morning sun warming her back, Sarah walked briskly, hoping to find help for her broken-down car. After an hour of walking, she came across a small, rustic village that wasn't marked on her map. The villagers were kind, offering her food and a place to rest while they arranged for her car to be towed. Sarah recounted her experience at the cabin to an elderly woman named Margaret, who listened with wide eyes. Margaret explained that the cabin had a dark history. The family who had lived there had vanished under mysterious circumstances many years ago. Locals believed their spirits remained bound to the place, unable to move on due to their unresolved tragedy. Sarah's story of finding and burying the family's belongings intrigued Margaret. She believed Sarah might have freed the spirits, but she also warned that such actions often come with unforeseen consequences. That night, in the safety of Margaret's home, Sarah had a vivid dream. She was back in the cabin, but this time it was filled with light and warmth. The family she had read about was there, smiling and at peace. They thanked her for releasing them from their torment. The vision then shifted, and Sarah saw herself standing at the edge of the forest, facing a shadowy figure that watched her silently before disappearing into the trees. Sarah awoke with a start, her heart pounding. The dream felt like a warning. She couldn't shake the feeling that her actions had indeed freed the spirits, but they had also stirred something else in the forest. The next morning, Sarah decided it was time to leave the village and continue her journey. She thanked Margaret and the other villagers for their hospitality and set off in her now repaired car. Yet, as she drove away, she couldn't help but glance back at the forest, wondering what mysteries still lay hidden within its depths. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah resumed her normal life, but the experience at the cabin haunted her thoughts. She began to notice small, inexplicable occurrences, shadows moving just out of sight, whispers on the wind, and the feeling of being watched. One evening, as she was sorting through her belongings, she found a photograph she didn't recognize. It was of the family from the cabin, standing together in front of the old oak tree. Scrawled on the back was a single word, remember. Sarah knew then that her connection to the cabin and its spirits was not over. She felt a pull to return to the forest, to uncover whatever remained hidden. With a mixture of dread and determination, she packed a bag and set out once more, driven by the need to understand the true nature of the cabin's secrets and to finally lay her own fears to rest. As she approached the familiar, ominous silhouette of the cabin, the air grew thick with anticipation. Sarah took a deep breath, pushed open the door, and stepped inside, ready to face whatever awaited her in the darkness. As Sarah stepped into the cabin, a chill ran down her spine. The air was heavy with a sense of foreboding, and the flickering lantern light barely pierced the darkness. She steeled herself, determined to uncover the final secrets that lay within these walls. Exploring the cabin methodically, she found nothing new on the ground floor. The furniture was as she had left it, the dust undisturbed. She then moved to the basement, where she had first encountered the whispers. Descending the creaky stairs, she noticed the air grew colder with each step. At the bottom, the room was eerily silent, the chest she had emptied still in its place. Sarah approached it, wondering if she had missed something. As she reached out to touch the chest, a sudden gust of cold air blew through the room, extinguishing her lantern. In the darkness, she heard a faint but distinct heartbeat. Struggling to relight the lantern, she felt the walls for any hidden compartments or clues. Her fingers brushed against something rough and jagged, a loose stone. She pulled at it, and the stone came free, revealing a small hidden cavity behind it. Inside, she found an old, leather-bound journal. With trembling hands, Sarah lit her lantern again and opened the journal. The pages were filled with frantic, scrawled entries from the cabin's last inhabitant. They detailed the family's descent into madness, driven by a dark presence that had taken hold of the father. The final entry was incomplete, trailing off mid-sentence, but it mentioned a ritual and a warning: the shadow demands a soul. As she read, the shadows in the basement seemed to deepen. She felt an oppressive presence surrounding her, the same dark figure from her dreams. It whispered in a language she couldn't understand, filling her mind with dread. Sarah realized that by freeing the spirits, she had disrupted the balance, awakening this ancient evil that now demanded a new victim. Panic set in, but she forced herself to think. The journal mentioned a ritual. If she could complete it, perhaps she could banish the shadow for good. The instructions were vague, but they involved symbols drawn with blood and an incantation spoken at midnight. Sarah's resolve hardened. She would not become another victim of the cabin's curse. She collected the necessary items and prepared for the ritual. As midnight approached, she drew the symbols on the floor, the flickering lantern casting eerie shadows around her. She pricked her finger and let her blood drip onto the symbols, then began to chant the incantation from the journal. The air grew colder, the shadows more menacing. The whispering intensified, and Sarah felt a force trying to stop her. She pushed through, raising her voice to drown out the whispers. The symbols on the floor began to glow, and the dark presence recoiled. Suddenly, a deafening roar filled the cabin, and the shadow coalesced into a humanoid form before her. Its eyes glowed with malevolence as it lunged at her. Sarah stood her ground, continuing the chant despite the terror gripping her heart. The symbols flared brightly, and the shadow screamed in agony, its form flickering and dissolving. With one final, guttural cry, it vanished, leaving the basement in utter silence. Exhausted and trembling, Sarah collapsed to the floor. The oppressive weight that had filled the cabin lifted, replaced by a sense of calm and finality. She knew the dark presence was gone for good. As dawn broke, she emerged from the cabin, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face. She looked back one last time, a sense of closure settling over her. The forest was no longer a place of fear but a testament to her bravery and resilience. Sarah drove away, ready to rebuild her life, knowing she had conquered the darkness within and without. The cabin, now a place of peace, stood quietly behind her, its secrets finally laid to rest.